Whoa, buddy. Put that thing back in its holster. We haven't gone anywhere.
I don't understand.
Check out the MichaelDukesShow.com for information on how to get access to the podcast.
Welcome to the party, pal.
The Michael Dukes Show.
The greed and the entitlement is astounding to me.
What more could you want from a low-budget radio program?
This is a dumpster fire.
That was just BS.
It is time to get a new perspective.
We know just what you need, and we've got just the cure. Open wide and prepare for a steaming hot cup of freedom.
I just don't fathom it.
The Michael Dukes Show, streaming live across the world.
Yep, live around the world on the internet at michaeldukeshow.com, where you will find the audio-only live stream and links to our social media sites, where we simulcast the show, and, of course, podcast links and everything else. It's it's all there. It's all right there. Just keep going. Just keep going. And go check it out, michaeldukeshow.com. And, of course, broadcasting live across the state of Alaska on this, your favorite radio station, and or FM translator. So thanks for coming in and joining us today. It is Tuesday, the Tuesday edition of the Big Radio Broadcast, and we are... we're here. We're back. We're ready to go. We're ready to dive into it. Today, of course, being Tuesday means that it's going to be our deep dive into the weekly top three, which are the top three issues that Brad Keithley from Alaskans for Sustainable Budgets thinks are important to discuss and to talk about. And today we're going to talk about the election, the post-election roundup, I guess we should say. Brad's going to talk about why moderate is the wrong word to describe who won in the Alaska elections. We're also going to talk about the next big spending issue, which is going to be, as we've been talking about, whatever it takes to increase K-12 spending. That's the next big push, is whatever it takes to keep these schools going. That's what we need to do. We'll just give them whatever they need. And then finally, what impact both Willow and Pika are going to have on this legislative session. And so Brad Keithley is going to be joining us here shortly and talking about those big three issues here in the state of Alaska. Then in hour two, we will be chatting with Chris Story, the man from Homer, who will come in and give us our weekly uplift. Yesterday, people were like, "Can we have Chris Story in now? I mean, are we done being beat up and the negativity, the stress from yesterday?" People were already wishing to get a chance to talk to Chris Story, and yet here we are. So it'll be today. We'll get the scoop from Chris, and we'll feel better about ourselves. Isn't that what it's all about? Feeling better about ourselves. All right. So we are going to we're going to be doing that today, and welcome to the program. All righty. Where do we want to start today on the news? Well, okay, I guess. So there's going to be some reorganization here on the Anchorage Assembly. Down there in Anchorage, they've got a bunch of stuff happening, including the fact that both Forrest Dunbar and Jamie Allard appear to be on the cusp of snatching victory in their legislative races, which will leave 2 seats vacant. And now the former acting mayor, who said she saved a lot of lives. That's what she said. I saved a lot of lives. And she has decided to not run for re-election. That is Austin Quinn Davidson. Austin Quinn Davidson, who said she's proud of her service. She stepped up to serve as mayor. She says, I literally saved many lives by making difficult decisions that were not always popular. And I met that challenge when we were called to demonstrate true leadership. And now she said, she's done. She wants to spend more time with her kid and her wife and all that stuff. And so she's not going to run. So there's going to be some potential for shakeup here in the assembly in Anchorage. Now, I don't know exactly what that means yet. Mayor Dave Bronson has announced his intent to run for re-election. So it's going to be a contentious race, right? A contentious election season, because boy, ain't nobody they love to hate more than Mayor Dave. And so now you're going to have 3 seats that are going to be open. And I just don't know where it goes from there. But we'll see. And then 4 additional seats are up for election in early 2023. So that makes a total of, what was it? I guess it's 7, right? 7 seats. The 12-member assembly membership could shift by more than half when the city's regular election results are going to be finalized this coming April. Because remember, they're on the Anchorage people, man, I swear. Their elections in April, not with the rest of us in the long run. So we've got 2 more members waiting, 1 announcing she's not running, and the 4 additional seats up for election in early 2023. So that's 7 seats out of 12. This should be fun. This should be fun. It will be interesting to see what comes out of that. But definitely a chance. Yesterday we were talking about, how do we overcome a lot of this stuff? How do we deal with a lot of this stuff? Well, remember, the stuff closest to home is what we need to be paying attention to, right? So, this is the opportunity. If you're in the Anchorage area, you're in that voting district, this is your opportunity to get involved and to, not throw bombs and alienate people and everything else. Go in there and just explain to people why you think you would do a good job and what your views are. And let's see if we can bring some semblance of normality and balance back to the Anchorage Assembly. That would sure be nice, wouldn't it? That would be super nice. But we've got a good opportunity there. 7 of the 12? Yes, please. I would love to see 7 of the 12 changed out there. Anyway, there are some options and opportunities there. All right. And then of course that's not going to be happening until April, but something to look forward to. All right. Talk about not being able to read the room. There are just certain people, you know who they are. They're in your life. They walk into a room and they say exactly the wrong thing right? They just walk in and they're just like, blah, 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 and you're like, dude, could you not even just read the room as to what was going on? Well, the NEA decided this weekend that they wanted to boast of their superiority. The NEA wrote this weekend on Twitter that teachers know better than anyone what students need. The tweet which went out on Saturday said, educators love their students and know better than anyone what they need to learn and thrive. Now, unfortunately, the 5,000 respondents on Twitter were not playing along with this. And in fact, many of them were like, increasingly, educators seem to know better than no one. Better than anyone? That's rich. Nope. Is this an ad for school choice? That's what. And then Betsy DeVos, who is former education secretary, chimed in and said, "You misspelled parents." Oh my. Oh my. I mean, I think people are starting to, to get through it. But again, not being able to read the room. This is the same kind of Terry McAuliffe move or politician move who say, we know better than you how to educate. I mean, they're just saying the quiet part out loud, right? That's what this is all about. That's all these folks are saying is what they've been insinuating and implying the whole time, which is, we know better than you how to raise your child, how to teach your child. We know better than you what the curriculum should be. And of course, they saw what happened to them when that came down in Virginia, right? I mean, you saw what happened there. When Terry McAuliffe tried to tell everybody that, no, you don't get to decide the curriculum. We do because we're the professionals. And then he was voted out of office immediately thereafter. This is that same kind of, I'm sorry, I can't read the room kind of thing. Educators love their students and know better than anyone what they need to learn and to thrive. No, I think the parents are still the best choice for that. I'm just going to say that. I just think the parents are still the best choice for that. Again, I just want to show you that's just reason number, 416, why you should probably consider homeschooling your children or sending them to, private school or charter school or pandemic pod or learning thing or teacher share or whatever else that they're calling it these days. Anytime you have this kind of arrogance is the time that you probably need to go, no, sorry. Not gonna do it. Not gonna do it. That's what we need to be jumping in on. All right. We're going to continue on. And we'll see what you guys have to say here in a little bit in the chat room. Meanwhile, Brad Keithley from Alaskans for Sustainable Budgets is coming in. Yeah, it's not a pandemic pod. That's what they were called during the pandemic. Now they're called what? Learn pods? You know what I meant. You know what I meant. All right, we're going to continue with the weekly top 3 right after this message. Don't go anywhere. Back with more right after
this. What is that?
Common sense.
Regularly heard on American radio.
Michael Duke Show. Radio.
Okay. Yeah, you misspelled parents. That was the classic comment this morning. All right. Good morning. Good morning. How are you guys this morning? You guys all ready for another... Start with the good news. I didn't really have any good news right now. Anything new with the challenge to the nut job from Louisiana who beat Liz? I haven't heard anything new other than Scott Kendall has become her attorney. I don't think we got around to that part of the story yesterday, but Scott Kendall is now going to be, he has become the poster child of all that is wrong in Alaska. Am I wrong? I'm not wrong. I'm not hashtag sorry, not sorry. That guy has become oof. All right. Let me see if there's anything else here. Mandatory voter education. They've been trying to cancel parents for a while now. Yeah, exactly. All right. Well, you guys have all been very quiet this morning. And there's not a whole lot of you in here today. I don't know if it's because we're not getting notifications out or people are just tired of the elections. But one way or the other, do me a favor. Let's get more folks in here. share the show, like and follow the show page, do all that stuff, and let's get it done. Okay. All right. Let's meanwhile go over to the green room here and drag Brad Keithley from the weeds here, see what he's got going on. Good morning, my friend. How are you doing this morning?
Michael, I'm doing great today. How about you?
You know, no complaints. I'm above ground, and I can actually my hair doesn't hurt anymore. So that was
Your hair was hurting?
Oh my God. Yeah. Everything was hurting. Everything was hurting, including my hair. And last time we talked, and that was the worst day of the whole thing. And now we're back and ready to go. So
I gotta say though, you worked through it like a trooper. You kept going.
Well, the problem is it's not like I can take a day off, right? There's not anybody to fill in the seat. And since my studio is in my house and my wife objects to having people over at 4:00 in the morning, I think that's kind of what has to happen. So,
have you ever put Terry on the air? Has she ever tried to host the show?
She's never tried to host the show, but she's been on the air with me before in the past. Yeah, it's been a few years, but she's popped into the studio before and done stuff with us. We've had a good time. But yeah, no, I just this is kind of a one-man deal, and I don't know if it's one of those things where you kind of work yourself into a position of you're indispensable. That was stupid, right? That was the dumbest thing ever. Can't ever take a vacation. Anyway, so yeah, we're going to, I feel better and I'm glad to have you. And are you ready to dive into the deep end of the pool today and get it all squared away?
I am, but I don't blame those people who are sleeping in this morning. This election sort of developed into exhaustion after a while. So
boy, it did.
And it's not over yet.
I mean, that's the worst part is that we've still got, we still got to wait, another 8 days now before the official release of of all the details and everything else. I mean, I think people are just exhausted. I mean, I really just think there's a little bit of, voter fatigue is not, that's not just a trite phrase. I mean, that's a real thing right now.
Yeah.
So, and I'm hoping that you're going to, have you been following what it looks like is going to be happening in the organization? Are you going to talk about that at all? Or are you?
Yeah, I'll talk about it some. And yes, I've been following it. And what I'm essentially going to say is we're back to the 20 teams, right? We're back to spend it all as long as we don't have to pay for it. And
well, that's kind of true, isn't it? I guess this is the redo. This is the redo.
and we even got Giesel back to do it. So it's
oh man, wow. All right. Well, Brad, hold the line for just a second. We're gonna be back to you. Don't go anywhere. Brad Keithley is our guest, Alaskans for Sustainable Budgets. We're going to dive back into this. Make sure that you like and follow the show page and subscribe and ring the bell on YouTube and do all that kind of stuff. Let's get to it. Here we go. Common sense, liberty-based, free thinking radio. Okay, fine. We are ready to dive into it. It is the weekly top 3, and those are the big 3 items as countenanced by the founder of Alaskans for Sustainable Budgets, Mr. Brad Keithley. Good morning, my friend. How are you doing today?
Michael, I'm doing great today. Back in Alaska, I've got my Michael Dukes mug back.
Oh man, you're feeling good, man. You're back in the. I saw your eggnog post, so I'm assuming there's eggnog in that cup somewhere.
There's heavy eggnog in there.
Heavy eggnog. Well, Brad, we were just talking about the absolute exhaustion that many of it. I mean, I was exhausted last week anyway, just because of the whole thing, the COVID thing. But I think people are just wiped out and they're frustrated. And you're going to give us a little bit of analysis today of, some of the discussion and talk around the moderates winning and all this kind of stuff. So I guess we'll start off there. What are we going to hit on here?
Yeah, I'm not sure I'm going to relieve the exhaustion or the frustration, but a little bit of analysis. We're beginning to see a lot of articles that talk about moderates having won this election in Alaska, moderates having won the legislature in Alaska, and they go down through the list of either Democrat seats or moderate Republicans that won seats. And I want to push back a little bit on that. In Alaska, we tend to classify candidates based upon their position on social issues. If they're socially moderate or socially conservative or socially liberal, we tend to use that classification for them, regardless of what their position is on fiscal issues. But fiscal issues are entirely separate and have a different mix. And you can be socially moderate and fiscally conservative. You can be socially conservative and fiscally liberal. There's the two don't necessarily and often don't overlap. And I think we're using the wrong term to describe on the fiscal side who we've elected in this election cycle. On the fiscal side, there's fiscal conservatives that believe in cutting spending and reducing and keeping spending down to essentially minimal requirements. Then there's fiscal moderates who believe in spending more, but they believe in spreading the burden across all those who benefit, broadly basing the fiscal burden across all those. And then you have another category of fiscal positions, and they sort of fall into two categories. One is the limousine liberals, the liberals who want to spend, but they don't want to pay for it personally. They want to shove the cost someplace else. And the plutocratic Republicans, who again are willing to spend as long as they don't have to pay for it, as long as they can shove the costs off on somebody else, as long as their wealth enables them to avoid having to pay. And I think what we've elected this cycle, if you look across the board, is we've elected limousine liberals and plutocratic Republicans instead of moderate Republicans. Instead of moderates. You don't hear many people, many candidates, very few candidates talking about we need to spend more, but we need to broadly base the revenue base so that it doesn't impact any given group unfairly. It doesn't shift the burden to one group or another. Sometimes you hear fiscal moderates talking about we're using a progressive income tax, and that's too much on the high end, and that has bad repercussions, and so we need to broaden the burden more broadly. Or sometimes you hear fiscal moderates saying we're pushing the burden too much down on middle and lower income Alaska families, and we need to broaden the burden. You don't hear a lot of that this election cycle. Instead, what you hear are people like Matt Clayman from the liberal side saying, that PFD, that's not a big deal. That's not an important issue. We'll just use that to finance the additional spending that we want to undertake. Or you hear Kathy Giesel saying, we can't have taxes. We need to spend more. We need to spend on K through 12, but we can't have taxes, and so we need to cut the PFD going forward. What you hear are plutocratic Republicans and limousine liberals that are out there that campaigned, and at least to this point in the cycle appear to be ahead, and appear to be, at least a lot of people are giving them credit for winning their races. So I think the press, and I linked a Nat Hertz blog for reference point on this when I sent you the list. I think the press is doing a disservice to the state by terming the people who were elected on the fiscal side as being moderates, because they're not. They're not. None of them are saying we need to spend more, but we need to spread it over all Alaska families so that the burden on any one family is relatively low. None of them are saying that. They're all saying a variation of cut the PFD, pay for it. We need to spend more, but cut the PFD and pay for it that way. shoving the burden onto middle and lower income Alaska families. And I think what we need is a recognition that we didn't elect fiscal moderates. We elected people who want to spend, and that looks like a moderate sort of, because moderates do want to spend, but they don't fill the second criteria of moderate, which is we want to spread the burden over the broadest possible base in order to keep the burden on any given Alaska family low. All of them are trying to push the burden off on middle and lower income Alaska families. To some degree, what we're setting up is a replay of the 20 teens, right? 2013, 14, 15, 16, 17. It's we need to spend, but we don't want to pay for the burden ourselves. So we need to shove it someplace else. In the 20 teens, we shoved it on future generations. I mean, by draining savings, by using the savings that's intended for all generations, by using the savings for this generation, we shove the burden off on future generations who will have to build up their own savings for when they hit their own fiscal difficulties. Now in the 2020s, we're setting up a situation where we've elected candidates who are going to go in there and still say, I don't want to pay for it. We need to spend more, but I don't want to pay for it. And now the burden is going to be shifted to middle and lower income Alaska families. And that's just not a moderate position. So I push back, and I think that the Alaska press would benefit, the Alaska media would benefit by better describing the positions of the candidates on fiscal issues, instead of just taking whatever their position is on social issues and applying it broadly across the candidate, or just saying, oh, they want to spend, so they must be moderate. I think we would be better served if the media went in and analyzed the actual fiscal position of the candidates who appear to be winning, and analyze what their position is on the revenue side, on the funding side, and realize that we don't have moderates, realize that we don't have people who are saying we need to spread the base, we need to spread this burden broadly across all Alaska families, realize that we have plutocrats on the Republican side and we have limousine liberals on the Democrat side.
I mean, this is what I've said we've been saying for quite a while here on the program, that the party labels and really the moderate conservative labels almost don't apply anymore. This all comes down to, are you pro-government spend or are you pro-private sector spend? Are you for protecting the private sector and the private economy, or are you for bolstering up the public economy at all costs? And it's the same kind of thing, right?
Right. It's in part that, and then if you're for bolstering up the government economy, how you're going to pay for it. I mean, you can be moderate. You can fit the label of fiscal moderate if you're for additional spending that you believe is needed, but you're willing to pay for it by spreading the burden broadly as opposed to shoving it on one class or another. You can fit the definition of fiscal moderate if you do that. But we don't have anybody. We don't have any candidates that I'm aware of that are arguing for that form of funding. I mean, what they're arguing for is, well, we got this other big pot of money. We used to have savings. We used to have a big pot of money in savings, and so we'll spend that down. And now we have this big pot of money that is in the PFD, and we'll just spend that down. So it's it is in part, favoring government over the private sector. But even when you favor government, you can still be moderate if you spread the burden. If your proposal is to spread the burden broadly, so that no one sector has to pay a huge amount or a disproportionate amount for it. We don't have that. That's not what's going on with people who have been elected back to the legislature again. So I think it's a misnomer. Again, on the fiscal side, I'm not an expert on the social side, and I'm not even going to try to get into that. But what we're seeing is people who are being ascribed the conservative or the moderate label based upon their social position on social issues, as opposed to what they're actually arguing on the fiscal side.
Well, can I ask you to sidebar for just a second, and maybe we'll do this as a subcategory of number one of the weekly top three, but explain to me why in your mind, this is where we're at with this election? I mean, we hear a lot of dissatisfaction. We saw a lot of dissatisfaction and frustration. And yet when push came to shove, a lot of those candidates who were more conservative in many ways, I mean, true conservatives, have gotten the boot. And so what are your thoughts on how the election has turned out and this move towards what is ostensibly a more moderate, right, kind of thing, or maybe a more pro-government spend side of the world? What give me your thoughts on why that happened.
I think it's a combination of things. One, I think I think the perception is the last legislature failed to come to grips with our fiscal situation, and they didn't deserve to come back. I mean, Kathy Giesel made a big deal with Roger Holland in arguing that he didn't solve anything, that he was just there and he was, tried to gut programs or tried to change programs, but he didn't solve anything. And I think it's a general frustration with the lack of coming to grips with the fiscal plan. I think that's lack of coming to grips with the solution to the situation that we face. I think that's one. Two, I think there is a perception that we need to spend more in certain areas, and the Roger Hollands of the world and others weren't going to do that. This plays out a lot in Fairbanks. I mean, I watched a couple of Fairbanks races closely, and I think there was the perception that we do need to spend more on K through 12. We do need to spend more on teachers, and the conservatives just aren't going to do that. And so we need to find somebody in our legislative races who's going to look out for our district, our interests. We need to find somebody who's going to do that, regardless of how they're going to pay for it. And I think there was a perception that we do need additional spending in certain areas. And I think candidates made inroads by suggesting that they would take up that flag and push forward on spending. So combination of, we didn't get a solution. We had Dunleavy as governor. We had conservative legislators. They didn't come to a solution. We're still facing the same issue, and we need to be changing our road a little bit by spending a little more here and there. And the conservatives aren't going to do it. So let's elect people who are.
So in part, what you're saying is that K-12 spending cry that we heard in a lot of campaigns was effective. I mean, that was an effective message to engage the electorate and get them involved, because you love children, right? You don't hate children, and of course they all need it, regardless of the analysis of how much we've spent or what we're spending right now or what we're getting for what we're spending. None of that mattered. It was just, it's for the children. I mean, that kind of was the winner of this election cycle.
Well, yeah, and you and I talked about it at the time. The first headlines hit about Anchorage closing schools. I mean, that was going to be their closing drive. That was, I don't know if it was an October surprise or a September surprise, but that was going to be the closing drive. And I think I talked about it at the time as being similar to the National Guard controversy that took care of Parnell in 2014. You just heard about it every day and every day and every day and every day until the election. And so you had questions about, what Parnell actually did with respect to the National Guard issue. And here we heard about education every day and every day and every day. The difference is K through 12 is not going to go away. It's going to continue through the legislative session, because the drive is going to be, as we'll talk about in the next segment, the drive is going to be to expand K through 12. And then you're going to get the tag-alongs. Oh, well, if we're going to expand K through 12, we need teacher retention. And if we need teacher retention, we need to find benefits for teachers. And then that's going to expand, and we need to define benefits for more government. I mean, it's going to grow and grow and grow, but it was very effective. I mean, to the average mom and pop out there, to the average voter, seeing those headlines every day about closing schools, and I'm sure the schools were strategically chosen based upon election districts as opposed to something else. Is closing schools in Anchorage in particular, but the K through 12. Then we had the articles about, this is not just an Anchorage issue; it's a statewide issue.
Right.
Fairbanks had to close schools last year. Out in the Delta, out in the YK Delta, it's a problem. Up in Nome, it's a problem. Down in the Southeast, it's a problem. It's just, I mean, yeah, that was a big driver, and I think people responded to it. And the conservative response was, "Oh, we'll fix that." But then they hadn't fixed. We hadn't fixed the fiscal situation in the last legislature in the last 4 years. So
Right.
what the surprise really to me, sort of, and it shows to some degree how the role the Valley plays in electing governors, because it's so deep red and it votes so strongly for Republican governors that it just sort of overwhelms the rest of the state. But the surprise to me is one legislator I talked to put it that we elected a Bill Walker legislature. The surprise to me is that we didn't elect is that they didn't go ahead and elect a gubernatorial candidate. I think that shows how bad Walker was as a candidate and how difficult a road Les had as a candidate. I think it also shows when one area of the state votes 90-10 in favor of a Republican candidate, the rest of the state can't overwhelm it. But it's but the surprise sort of is, yeah, we elected a Walker legislature, but we didn't elect a Walker governor. So how that's going to play out is going to be an interesting issue as we go through the next 4 years. But I think K through 12 was a huge driver.
And K-12 is going to be our next topic here on the Michael Duke Show. That's going to be number 2. We're going to take you over to that here in just a second. Brad Keithley is our guest, Alaskans for Sustainable Budgets. We're going to continue here in just a moment. The Michael Duke Show, common sense, liberty-based, free-thinking radio. Don't go anywhere. We'll return with Brad Keithley right after this.
If you missed the show, you can listen to it on your time with Dukes On Demand. Oh, and it's free. Like America used to be. Streaming live every weekday morning on Facebook Live and MichaelDukesShow.com.
Okay, Brad Keithley is our guest, Alaskans for Sustainable Budgets. Yeah, I just don't know. Now, Brad, you're hearing also, of course, we're hearing the rumblings about the organization and what's going to be happening. And what it looks like right now is they're going to want to shut the conservatives out in the Senate. I'm hearing that there's already basically a plan in place, and that Schauer and Hughes and Myers are going to be basically sitting on their hands, and the whole attempt is to discredit them and move them over to the outside. I'm gonna leave you to the screen here for a second. Just wax poetic about what you see as far as it comes to the organization of the Senate and the House, and give me your thoughts until I return. There you go.
Well, on the Senate side, I think, Michael, you're right. I think it looks like that is going to be a coalition. The question is who's going to be headed by. Gary Stevens is rumored to be the Senate president in one form. That makes sense to have a Republican moderate heading it up in one form. So that seems to be the direction that the Senate's headed in. I think it will be disappointing if it's just Shelley, Mike, and Rob that are in the minority. It'll if Kaufman joins the majority, and if Jesse Bjorkman and others join the majority, I think they will regret the day when it comes to future election cycles. But that's their choice. That's their choice to make. I think they ought to show more conservative principles than just joining with the coalition of the day. On the House side, it's much more unclear about what's going to go on over there. One analysis I have followed, the theme of it is that the House, the administration will push back and make the House different, or try to make the House a Republican-led body, so that there's not a coalition in both bodies, that they're not facing a coalition in both bodies. that gives the administration more credit, I think, than they've shown over the years in their ability to influence where the legislature goes. But that's one theory. I do think the Republicans will try hard to organize on the Republican side, but Bryce Edgman is a force on trying to pick people off and get people to come back over to a coalition, and there are going to be Republican legislators that are going to be susceptible to doing that. In either event, even if it's a coalition, I'm not sure that means that the so-called moderates or progressives or limousine liberals or however you want to classify them, even if there's a coalition on both sides, I don't think that means that they run wild. What it does put, though, is a lot more pressure on Dunleavy, on the governor, on how he's going to push back and when he's going to push back. Dunleavy has shown the inclination to fight sometimes and not fight other times. And it'll be interesting to see if there is coalitions on both sides and they do pass a lot of moderate legislation headed toward the governor. It'll be interesting to see how Dunleavy reacts to that. And that sort of goes back to the discussion we had last time, which is, what's Dunleavy's plan for these next 4 years?
Right.
Does he want to leave a legacy? Does he want to build up some sort of solution to the fiscal situation, or does he just want to rock along 4 more years, sort of like he has the last 4 years, and sort of preserve whatever credibility he has as just whatever his brand is, and take on Lisa if she wins this election. Take on Lisa 2 years after the end of his governor's term. So there's a lot of unknowns. I think it's clear that we'll have a coalition on the Senate side. It's just a question of how many members are in there. And on the House side, I don't think it's clear yet what we'll have. But whatever it has, whatever we end up with, I don't think we're going to have a huge amount of legislation that gets all the way through the governor.
Well, and I do not have the confidence that Governor Dunleavy is going to take the strong stance with the red pen if all these moderates get in there, and or all these coalitions and limousine, like you're saying, plutocrats and limousine liberals, if they do all this stuff. I just don't have the confidence that he's going to go in there and be that bastion of fiscal conservatism that we hoped he would be. Because as you said, I think he might have eyes towards the future. Maybe not. Maybe he does, but I don't have the confidence that he's going to step up and clip those things out quickly.
If my hope would be, probably unlikely to come about, but my hope would be if there is a push for spending on both sides. If, for example, a big K through 12 spending bill gets through, and if defined benefits gets through, I would hope Dunleavy would at least use that as an opportunity to fashion an overall fiscal resolution, as opposed to just rocking back and signing, some version of whatever gets through.
All right, we're kind of ran off the rails there, but we're trying to finish up some thoughts here on some important issues. But before we go, I guess we'll revisit that in the end of the break here. But let's get on to number 2. At least get number 2 done before we run out of daylight. Brad Keithley, Alaskans for Sustainable Budgets, is our guest, and we were just talking about the number 1 issue. Now on to number 2, which of course is the next big spending thing. The next big spending thing is going to be that K-12 spend that we've been hearing about, how we're just not spending enough on children. We're just not spending enough on education. That's why our scholastic aptitude is so bad. That's why, because we can't retain teachers and we can't do this and we can't do that. And it's because we're not spending. I mean, we spend more than almost any other state in the nation, but we're not spending enough, because we're unique and we need more money to make it work. Brad, number 2.
Well, yeah. So that's going to be the push, that we need to spend more. We need to spend more on the BSA. We need to spend more, no doubt, on the adjusters. And while we're at it, we need to go in and we need to fix teacher retention by notwithstanding the fact the entire country's having problems with teacher retention. We're going to fix it. We're going to fix all this teacher retention problem by defined benefits, by adding a defined benefits program. And while we're at that, while we're fixing the teacher retention program, why don't we go in and fix, the troopers and everybody else? And why don't we just do defined benefits across the board and make everybody happy again? So that's that. I mean, that's going to be the push on the spending side, and it's going to be a big push. And you can see from the election, you can see it from the headlines, you can see it from the Anchorage School Board. Elise Galvin was on Alaska Public Media and talking about how we need to, fix education by all this additional money. Here's where I think the soft underbelly of that issue is, and that is who pays. I've had discussions with people who have said, when I've asked, they've talked about the need for all this spending, and my response is, okay, who pays? And well, regrettably, we're going to have to use the PFD. Okay, so basically, you want middle and lower income Alaska families to pay. You don't want the top 20% to have to pay anything toward it, and so you're just going to shove it all off on middle. Well, I don't want to do that. I mean, that's unfair. If we're trying to deal with kids, we ought to deal with families also, and I don't want to do that. All right, well then you're gonna support a broad-based funding for it, where everybody contributes equitably toward the costs. Well, yeah, I don't know if I want to do that, but that's fair. And so yeah, maybe we ought to push for that. I think, to me, and you'll hear a lot from me on this issue as we go through the legislature. I think that the soft underbelly, the way to deal with this issue is to say, you shouldn't want middle and lower income Alaska families to have to pick up the entire burden. You should want to spread that burden equitably across all Alaska families. And when the top 20% realize that they're going to have to pay a share of that, when they realize they're not going to be able to just lean back and say, yeah, spend whatever you want, as long as we don't have to pay for it. When they realize they're going to have to pay a share of that, they're going to kick in. The donor class is going to kick in and start pushing back on it. As I've said before, as we talked before on the show, you and I can spend all day, several days, every week, every month, the entire year, talking about all of the reasons why we don't need to expand K through 12 spending, or if we do, it needs to be in very selected areas, and we need to take advantage of efficiencies in other areas. And so there doesn't need to be an overall need in spending. We sort of need to reorient it. You and I can talk all day about that. But politically, if the donor class isn't talking about that, if they aren't pushing back on their representatives, on their legislators on that issue, you and I are just basically talking to ourselves, because the legislators are going to listen to us to a point, but they're going to listen to their donors more. And if the donors are saying, yeah, we probably ought to spend more, but just make sure I don't have to pay for it. As long as that's what's going on, we're going to end up spending a lot more. I think the pushback on the whatever it takes approach, which is what I hear often from people who are supporting additional K through 12 spending. We got to spend it whatever it takes. I think the pushback on that is to say, no, if your point is we need to look after the kids, we need to look after Alaska families, we need to make sure working Alaska families have the opportunities, all the opportunities available to them that you think they ought to have available to them, then we need to spread that cost equitably, so that we're just not undermining your objective. If you want to make working Alaska families better by spending more, you're going to undo it if you push all of the costs of that additional spending off on middle and lower income Alaska families, off on working Alaska families. So to achieve your objective, you've got to spread the burden more. You've got to get it. You've got to make sure that all Alaska families are contributed equitably, that the burden is spread broadly, so that you minimize the burden on any one family. And to me, that has some impact when you're pushing back on K through 12 spending, because it engages the top 20%. The top 20% then starts pushing back themselves on K through 12 spending.
I guess I would agree with that, except for you and I have been talking about this for years. We've been talking about this specific argument, that this is not something that the news media is picking up on. It's not something that anybody else is really talking about. And so they can just I mean, I know you've talked to the legislator about it. You've written articles. We've talked about it on the program here. I've talked about it. But I mean, nobody else seems to be picking up that mantra and talking about what about the equitability of the spread and anything else. And so it gets ignored. How do we make people think about this? I mean, that's the big thing. I mean, I agree your argument is a sound argument, but it's not getting out there to the common Joe. They're not making these leaps of logic and seeing that. How do we get the messaging out there? Because the legislature is not listening to that because they can ignore it because nobody else is picking it up.
Michael, I can only we can only do what we can do. I mean, I write the weekly column for the Landmine. We have the weekly program here. Part of it is I think fiscal conservatives need to pick up on that argument. They want to say that we just shouldn't be spending. And as we saw in this election cycle, that just got rolled over. That position got rolled over. And so I think people who are listening to this program, I think they need to be arguing. Fiscal conservatives ought to be arguing we shouldn't be spending. You put that down as your first marker if you want to. But if we're going to spend, it should be the cost should be distributed broadly. And I think fiscal conservatives need to pick up that argument as well. Basically, what their argument has been to this point is we shouldn't be spending more, full stop, period, end of statement. I don't want to discuss it anymore. That didn't win. That argument doesn't win. We saw in this election cycle, that argument doesn't win. You get rolled over. At least in this environment, you get rolled over when you make that argument. So to me, we need to have more people making the argument that you shouldn't be spending more, but if you are, make sure you spread it broadly. I think more people making that argument would be helpful. I mean, I think it would motivate maybe Republican moderates who are trying to push forward with spending and get away with pushing it all off on middle and lower income Alaska families. I think it might make them think twice. But it's yes, you and I have talked about it a lot. But I think to this point, conservatives have not wanted to go that additional step because they've said it's just enough to say I'm going to stop spending. I don't think that works.
Brad Keithley, Alaskans for Sustainable Budgets. We're out of time. Brad, thank you so much for coming on board with us this morning. We appreciate you being part of it. Thanks.
Michael, as always, thanks for having me.
Folks, we got more coming up. The Michael Duke Show. I'm not saying it's the wrong argument, Brad. I'm just saying that, we've been beating this drum, and yet there's not, especially in the journalism, they're not looking at, it's like they're just taking the talking points and regurgitating them instead of, having some analytical thought on it and say, well, okay, great, but where does the money come from? Where does, who pays and all that kind of stuff. It seems like more and more, it's just the rubber stamp mill more than anything else. Nobody is really addressing this issue that we keep bringing up.
It's places like Must Read. Must Read is for all of its bad, for all of its good and its bad, it's a broadly read publication. And Must Read has been among those who just said no more spending, period, end of stop, full stop. That's just it. And I understand why you argue that. You and I argued that in the early 2010s. We just shouldn't spend more until to me at least the ball just kept going and going and going and you had to develop an additional argument. I think Must Read and places like that need to sort of wake up to this argument. If they continue to just say we don't need to spend more, full stop, that's the end of my discussion. If you just run over me if you're going to spend more, I don't have anything else to say, then I think they're going to get run over. But I think that publication and I think other Republican talking points need to be, well, we don't think you ought to spend more, but if you're going to spend more, at least distribute it broadly. At least don't focus it on middle and lower income Alaska families. And I think that sort of argument if made more broadly, will start seeping into the public discussion.
I hope so. I really hope so. Because again, the irony of this whole thing is that they supposedly are trying to protect average working class Alaskans, and instead they're stealing the future from average working class Alaskans and their children, because they're, taxing the PFD for all those kids as well. And so it's insane. It really is just insane. But you're right. This idea that we're just going to stand there and grumble and say, well, we're just only going to do cuts and that's it. I'm not talking to you anymore. That makes no sense whatsoever, because obviously, we're obviously in a minority. I mean, we've talked about this on the program, and it's been my position for a long time that we should cut. And that, that should be one of the only options out there. But it's obviously not the winning message. It's obviously not what people really want in the long run.
And Michael, it's because people like Matt Clayman are able to go out and say, let's spend more. And by the way, you don't have to pay for it. All my donors, you don't have to pay for it, because I found a way to shove it off on middle and lower income Alaska families. And so let's spend more. You don't have to pay for it. You feel guilty about the fact that we're going to have to close schools and all that sort of stuff. So help me spend more. You don't have to pay for it, and we'll be fine. It's a different thing if Matt Clayman has to go and say to his donors, help me spend more. You have to pay for a bunch of it, but help me spend more. You're going to get people pushing back. The donor class, the top 20%, are going to start pushing back on that. So it's, I understand. To me, the way that conservatives can keep themselves whole in this situation is say, first position, don't spend more. But don't stop there, because we're getting run over by voters. Don't spend more. But if you're going to spend more, at least spread the burden broadly to all Alaska families, as opposed to concentrating it on middle and lower income Alaska families. That, to me, should be the conservative message, as opposed to just don't spend more and I stop. That's and I'm going to stand in the doorway. Well, guess what? They just pushed through you when you stood in the doorway.
What would be as an interesting thought experiment? What would be interesting is to get all the people who have been no more spending, basically turning around and saying, okay, what we need is a broad-based tax. Period. That's it. I mean, just, we're going to pay for it. Just a broad-based tax. Period. That's what we should all get behind. Could you? The groundswell of a bunch of people saying, okay, just give us a broad-based tax. And then the screeching that you would hear from the donor class on that side, that would be an interesting, it's never going to happen, but it would be interesting to see people like me who have been anti up until this point, just basically say, well, the only solution is to get them all, is to bite them all. Put everybody gets skin in the game. There you go. Boom. Everybody pays a tax, period.
Yeah. And you don't have to give up the principle of don't spend more. I think it's a two-pronged. It's don't spend more. We don't need to spend more. But if you're going to spend more, make sure it gets spread broadly, so it doesn't get focused just on middle and lower income Alaska families. And it's not, please tax me. It is, don't tax anybody. Don't spend more. But if you're going to do it, at least make sure that everybody has skin in the game. I think that is a fiscally conservative position. It is a fiscally responsible position. Don't spend more, but if you're going to do it, at least make sure everybody has skin in the game and everybody's involved in that additional spending. It's not saying tax me. It's saying don't tax me, but if you're going to tax me through PFD cuts, if you're going to spend more, then at least spread it broadly.
Maybe we should just come out and advocate for the tax right now. Just boom. Just go ahead, tax it. Broad-based tax. Make it happen.
Interestingly enough, the people that have spoken about that issue the most are Mike Shower, Shelley Hughes, Rob Myers. People who have said, basically, Shower said in the context of the fiscal policy working group, Hughes has said on and off on various occasions, if you're going to spend more, then it needs to be broadly based. And I think that's a very solid position to take.
We didn't even get to number 3, Brad. It's sad.
We'll do it next time.
That's where it is. Thanks, Brad. Appreciate it. Brad Keithley, Alaskans for Sustainable Budgets. Appreciate you coming on board.
Thanks for having me.
All right, folks. We got more coming up. Common sense, liberty-based, free thinking radio, The Michael Duke Show.
Whoa, buddy. Put that thing back in its holster. We haven't gone anywhere.
I don't understand.
Check out themichaeldukesshow.com for information on how to get access to the podcast.
Welcome to the party, pal.
The Michael Duke Show.
The greed and the entitlement is astounding to me.
What more could you want from a low-budget radio program?
This is a dumpster fire.
That was just BS.
It is time to get a new perspective.
We know just what you need, and we've got just the cure. Open wide and prepare for a steaming hot cup of freedom.
I just don't fathom it.
The Michael Dukes Show, streaming live.
Streaming live around the world on the interwebs at michaeldukeshow.com and across the state of Alaska on this, your favorite radio station and or FM translator. It is the Michael Duke Show. Good morning and welcome back to Hour 2 of the Big Radio Broadcast Tuesday edition. We just finished up with Brad Keithley, who brings us the weekly top 3. We only got to number 2 of the weekly top 3 today because it was it was just that there was a lot to talk about in the first 2. It's definitely a frustrating time right now for many of us who are what we would consider to be fiscal conservatives. It's a crazy, crazy time. Let's put it that way. Coming up on this hour of the program, we're going to be talking with Chris Story, the man from Homer, who's going to give us our weekly life coaching lesson and get us all squared away here and ready to talk about, well, I don't know, just better stuff. Maybe, I think we need it just from a positivity standpoint. I need that little uplift is what I need right now. I want to remind you that this hour of the program is being brought to you by your friends over there at Satellite West, satellitewest.com, from Metlakatla to Minchumina to Minto to, I don't know where else, another M space, Minchumina. Any of those places in the state, if you are there and you need to be connected to the rest of the world, either with a telephone call or an email or a text message, or you just want to be able to surf the internet, the folks at Satellite West are there. And they can take care of it and connect you with the Iridium satellite network and make sure that no matter where you are in the great state of Alaska, that they will keep you connected and keep you ready to go. Special thanks to the folks at Satellite West. We appreciate them for sponsoring the program, and we look forward to them continuing to sponsor the program, and especially this hour. So thank you again to Satellite West for being part of this as we go through. Okay. So we just finished up with Brad, and I just don't know. I agree with Brad's argument about the fact that if we are going to spend all this money on state stuff and all this new money, that it should be equitably spread amongst all Alaskans. That just seems like an equitability and equality issue, right? Everybody should pay evenly. And instead, what we have right now is we have a system where they are taking the permanent fund dividend to spend on more state government. And the ones that are disproportionately affected by that, of course, are the middle income, the lower income folks, the working class folks. They're the ones that are feeling the pinch on this more than anything else. And while I agree with his argument on that, unfortunately, it's not it's not an argument or a talking point that up until now has been picked up by anybody in the mainstream. It's, I mean, here we are, talking about it, and yet the news media doesn't pick it up. The news media doesn't talk about the disproportionate effect of a PFD taking on the lower income classes or the working class families. Nobody is in the news media is talking about this. Not a single article about the economic impact of the taking of the PFD. I have, if you could show me one article that talks about how it disproportionately affects those people who can least afford it. So while it's a good argument, it's not being picked up and discussed in the average circles. Have you folks been talking with your friends and relatives and neighbors about it? Have you talked with your coworkers and other people about that disproportionate effect of taking from the lowest income Alaskans to feed the state government, to feed the beast? No. It's the argument that we should be having. And I'm starting to wonder if maybe instead, as I was just talking with Brad during the break, maybe we should just start advocating for an income tax. Maybe we should just start advocating for that. Now, I know people like James in the chat room and stuff, they're screaming at their radio right now and losing their minds because no, it's not. Well, all I'm saying is right now, what we're doing right, none of it's working. None of those talking, and the upper income Alaskans are just smiling and saying, yeah, go ahead, take the PFD. That's fine. We don't care. But, don't tax us, because I mean, we are already paying in this state a tax. We just don't ever see it, right? It's a stealth tax. We don't ever see it because the money goes straight into the state coffers. That money goes straight into the state coffers, and we never see a dollar of it coming directly into our pockets, and we never see it leave. So it's essentially frictionless. It's essentially painless for us. And excuse me. And so we never see it, we never feel it. And so now when somebody starts talking about, well, what we should do to make it more visible and equitable, and so that everybody knows, they've got skin in the game, maybe we should have some other kind of broad-based tax. Oh, no, we can't do that. We can't pay for any of those things. We can't. But I'm starting to think that that's the only way you're going to get these people's attention. I mean, that's the only way that otherwise they have the power to take for you. They have the power to take from you and continue to take from you and damage those, lower income working class people until the cows come home, and you can do nothing. And no, look, I'm not saying that it would be a good thing advocating for an Alaskan IRS to enforce a new bureaucracy, more government with the power of the sword to collect. They're already picking our pockets before it ever gets there. It's not even going into our pockets. That's already happening. I'm not saying it's a perfect solution. I'm saying I'm looking for any solution at this point. We're just riffing here. We're just talking, right? We're just having a conversation. Because what we've been doing is not working. What we've been doing on this program for the last 20 years has not been working. What we've advocated for, has not worked. And what is the definition of insanity? I mean, that's the problem. So maybe there needs to be a change of plan, maybe a change of attack here, of the way to get into this. I mean, I don't want a broad-based tax, but maybe that's the only way it's going to be to get those people engaged, those people who want to continue to spend and take the PFD and all that. Maybe that's what it's going to take, is for people like you and me who are smaller, more limited government, but at some point are going, you know what? Tax everybody equally. I don't know. I'm just thinking out loud here. I'm thinking, how do we get more people to pick up that conversation? Because again, Brad's argument is a valid argument that you are disproportionately affecting the biggest part of the population base, that 80%, lower 80% income. And it's a valid argument. We've been making it. We've been throwing it out there. We've talked about it, but has anybody picked it up? Has anybody? I mean, even legislators who are our friends, right? I mean, legislators who are friendly to the show and all this kind of stuff. Even some of our favorite legislators have not picked up the concept or talked about it or used it as a plan of attack to say you are disproportionately affecting the largest slice of the Alaskans' populations and you're damaging the economy and you're doing all these other things. I mean, I don't know. Maybe it requires a complete change of tactics. I mean, it's a question. It is a question. I'm trying to find some way to move the needle. Maybe that's a drastic way. I mean, maybe that is a drastic way to do it. But it would definitely be interesting to see. It would definitely be interesting to see what the reaction is. Now, Jim makes a valid point in the chat room as well to say the lower 80% are the ones sending back legislators who are anti-PFD. True. So anyway, I'm trying, this is again part of a continuation of our conversation yesterday about how do we, what do we need to change? Because obviously what we're doing is not working. Obviously what we've been doing is not moving the needle. So maybe it requires drastic change in the messaging or in the angle of attack or whatever. Maybe that's what we need to do. I'm thinking about, I don't know. Like I said, I'm just thinking out loud right now because I know some of you out there are again, just losing your mind and screaming at the radio. I'm not saying it's the best plan. I'm saying it's a plan, but if we just keep doing what we're doing, no new spending, just no, we're not going to move beyond, you can't move. This is the hill we die on. Well, then you'll die on the hill because there's nothing else. Whoops. Brian says, having income tax is a huge lever to affect change. Simply having an income tax or sales tax doesn't mean it has to be collected. It's the sword that will hang over heads that can be used when we have budget shortfall. It's fair. You want more stuff, more services, pony up or find cuts. I mean, that's basically Jay Hammond's argument, right? When he railed against eliminating the income tax from the books completely His advocation was that just to zero it out and leave it on the books. You could always turn it back up. And so, because again, just like that, like you said, it's a sword of Damocles that was being held over the heads of those who would use or spend more. So I don't know. It's interesting. I'm going to have to give it some more thought. And maybe we'll have some more discussions on this here as we go through. All right. Let's take a quick break. And when we come back, we're going to continue. Chris Story will be our guest. We'll get our weekly uplift this week. Oh, baby. We'll return. The Michael Duke Show. Common sense, liberty-based, free-thinking radio. Don't go anywhere. Back with more right after this.
What is that?
Common sense. Regularly heard on American radio. Michael Duke Show. Radio.
Okay. What do you say? I wouldn't let them, here's what Tyler says, I wouldn't let them institute a tax to activate more voters because even the new legislatures that those newly engaged voters would install still wouldn't get rid of the new tax. I mean, that's always the danger, right? I mean, that's the danger to this. I mean, that's, again, let's talk about this. Not liberty-based nor common sense. James, I mean, okay. I again, I'm thinking out loud here and having conversations with you. Then what is your solution? I'm asking. What is your solution? I'm curious. I mean, the problem is this is what government does, man. What's more dangerous? And here's that's a thought. Rob just said, "What's more dangerous, a government that taxes you or a government that can grow all it wants without taxing you?" We have become so adverse to any discussion of any kind of taxation that we're willing to give them anything and let them do anything as long as there's no taxes. Anything. Do anything you want. You want to take the PFD? Take the PFD. Just don't tax me. Oh, you want to spend more on education? Just do that. Just don't tax me. Oh, you want to buy new widgets for the whatsy-whoosy? Oh, just do that, but just don't tax me. I mean, we spent $16 billion under that mantra of just don't tax me. I got to think about this more. I got to think about this more, but I got to say that is the problem. We have become so adverse to it that we can't see the danger of governmental growth without any kind of governor on it, any kind of, not governor like Dunleavy, but any kind of restrictor on it. How about a show pointing at fingers at those who don't vote? The people are just not, this is nothing new, Kim. People have not voted. It's always been the 20% that have moved the needle on everything. A lot of people just don't care. They're not going to get engaged. Some are, some aren't, but for the most part, it's almost always been that way. Because people have become complacent. All right, Chris Story, the man from Homer, on the phone with us. Hello, sir. How are you?
It would be interesting, Michael, if there was. Do you, if you have you ever done a show where people? And I don't know if you can trust what people will tell you in that respect, but I would be curious as to why does the average person who doesn't vote? Why don't they? That's actually a really interesting point. Like we, of course, we know we have low voter turnout, but I'd
Right.
be curious as to really have a deep, honest conversation with somebody who perpetually doesn't vote. Do you just don't think you matter? Do you think you're not smart enough on the issues? Do you just not really care? What is it?
Well,
I think
that's it.
it's psychologically speaking. I would love to get to the bottom of that.
That would be an interesting show. Now, unfortunately, somebody probably listening to this show is probably engaged enough to want to vote. So,
Yeah,
I d-
you have to find somebody who
yeah,
perpetually just simply doesn't
yeah,
do
we'd
it.
have to find somebody outside of the show that we could bring in as an interview to say, why don't you vote? Why don't you get engaged on these issues? Why are
You
you
know, the
not interested?
municipal in between elections, and people forget. Oh, we voted. That's right. We had some school bonds and a school board member. I forgot. Oh, okay,
Yeah,
it was
yeah.
August or whatever. But these big elections. Why do we have such minimal, meager?
It's a good question. All right, here we go. The Michael Duke Show. All right, we're ready to dive into it today. Our weekly uplift with Chris Story, the man from Homer. Although it was working about the lack of voter turnout and everything, and Chris came up with a brilliant idea that maybe we should all be interviewing people who just don't vote and just don't participate in the political process and find out why. What is the reasoning? What is the um, I don't know. I don't know. Some people, someone in the chat room just said, "My friend says it's so corrupt. Then what's the point?" Well, phew, man, that's a depressing point of view. But maybe that's what it is. Maybe that's how people feel. They just feel like, what does it matter? The game is rigged, and what does it matter anyway? I don't know. You're right, Chris. That would be an interesting discussion to have. I don't assume you've never had that discussion on your show.
Not really. No, not from the standpoint of actually talking to somebody who, on a regular basis, doesn't plug in or participate or feel that their opinion matters. And I think that sort of nihilistic approach towards life, um, I would have thought the more outraged people are, the more engaged they're going to get. And yet we see the numbers this year, and yeah, minimal to the turnout was not a shock, I guess.
Yeah,
Anyway, but it's
a
interesting.
moderate turnout. I mean, more than anything else. What is it?
Yeah.
Mid 20s, something like that. So yeah, not a huge groundswell of we're not talking about a 50% for turnout.
And I know one person who was very distraught and told me, and this person normally votes on a regular basis, and this person couldn't find their ID. And so I said, well, I think you can vote anyway. You might remain in a question status for a minute, but
Right.
I would still just go down. And what I love about small towns and Alaska is really a collection of small towns, even in Los Anchorage. You probably know the people there. There's somebody that's working in that polling center goes, oh, I know. Yeah, I know this person. And so anyway, really just not much of an excuse not to participate, but I don't know. It's frustrating. It kind of swerves right into what I wanted to talk to you about today, and that is the practice of happiness. I think politics or engaging or looking at anything is also a practice. Is a
Yeah.
situation where your habitual activities will lead to some result.
I would
And if
argue
you
that
feel, go,
politics is the opposite of the practice of happiness for most people.
especially for you.
Yeah. Oh man. I'm sorry. Go ahead. So the practice of happiness. What exactly
Swinging
do you mean?
Maalox.
Yeah, Maalox. Exactly. Give me a little
Well,
Mylanta.
just thinking in terms of the word practice, if we're going to talk about showing up politically, we're going to talk about showing up in your community in some way or capacity. It is a practice, not dissimilar from a doctor's practice, a medical practice, legal practice, real estate brokerage. These practices, we accept that that's a practice. What about you showing up in your community and taking an interest in the outcome of these elections? Or, for example, happiness is a practice. It's not something that it can land on you. Happiness finds you sometimes. Happiness can interrupt you in an everyday life, but it can just as easily go away. If you're relying upon happiness to be the butterfly that lands upon you in the field, it will just as quickly leave you if you do not have a practice, if you don't have a way about you that is moving you towards happiness or creating a sense of happiness in your life, which, Tiffany always reminds me, life is 50-50. Half the time you may not be happy. Maybe it's 80-20 for some people. With a practice, I think you can move it closer to 80% happy, even in dire circumstances. Even a Michael Dukes post-election, post-flu illness, post-whatever can find happiness with a practice, because you have to show up, and bless you for showing up even when you didn't feel well. It's a practice. That's it. A radio broadcast is a practice. It's something you show up to. Voting, engaging in your community, seeking happiness is a practice. It's a way.
So, I guess you come in with all these buzzwords, Story, and you're like, yeah, practice of happiness. Okay. So give me some practical, how do I institute something like that in my life? I mean, how do I, it sounds like a good buzzword and a good, book quote, but what is the actual mechanical steps of practicing happiness? Give me some for examples in my life here. Come on.
Okay. Yeah. It's creating habits. It's not any dissimilar. It's really the same as health or physical fitness, anything else. It's a series of habits, and the results speak for themselves in our life. And so, if you want to create a habit of happiness, I think there's one key word, and it's called gratitude. And gratitude is also a habit. But if you make gratitude your aim, you can't help but be happier. It's just, they go hand in hand. Peanut butter and chocolate in a Reese's cup are perfect together. So are happiness and gratitude. So a practice of gratitude looks like, well, it looks different for everybody, but it could look for you. It could look like in the morning having a practice. I'll just tell you what I do. In the morning, I wake up, as I try to do every morning, and
Right.
I immediately go into a state of gratitude, because I might have just come from a horrible dream. I might have just come from a dream where Biden won his third election, his third term. I might, who knows? It could have been something even scarier than that, or whatever. Your dreams are there. Your subconscious could be moving 100 miles an hour. He's thinking about what you got to do today, and I force myself and I squeeze myself through the venturi of gratitude. I will myself to begin thinking about what I'm grateful for, who I'm grateful for, my health, all the way down to the cellular health. I'm so grateful. And I put myself into that state on purpose. But that is a habit that I created some 20 years ago when I first heard Tony Robbins for the first time talking about his hour of power, that first hour in the morning, and protecting it from the outside. And rarely can you protect it if the first thing you do is grab your phone. Instantly, you're going to either have a news notification or something could just spring right into your life that is not going to put you in a place of happiness. So I force myself not to. I go into a state of gratitude. I do some simple stretching and exercises, and that's how I begin my morning. That, for me, is a practice of happiness and gratitude. And when I can fit that into my morning, it makes all the difference for the rest of the day.
So the attitude of gratitude is the thing that you say precipitates the practice of happiness, because
actually instituting it. Yeah, Addie, you're right, and that's a great alliteration. But it can also just be looking at it just as simple as literally a series of habits that create that gratitude. And for me, the habit is willing myself to go into that state of mind and frame of mind first thing in the day. And I know on a morning where I skip it, or a morning where something interrupts me that I don't put myself to that state, I feel it through the rest of the day. However, that's the beauty of it. Just like meditation, you can stop, and put yourself back into it. I've never been one to meditate. I've never found it to be helpful. But when I think about putting myself into a state, which is probably what those who practice what do you call it, the transcendental meditation or different things, probably feel the same thing with emptiness or nothingness. Mine is forcing myself into a state of gratitude.
Robbie in the chat room says happiness is an attitude, not a condition. And that's pretty profound because it really is true. Because again, the one thing that you have control over is, and we've talked about this many, many times, but the one thing that you really have control over, a lot of times it's not circumstance, it's not cause and effect, it's not what's going on around you, but it is your reaction to those things. And so if you go into it with the attitude of gratitude or the habits of happiness, is that as far as that goes, it is an attitude and not a condition. I mean, you can decide, I know it's trite, but you can decide to be happy.
Yeah, even in the middle of a crisis at work or in your life or your family, if you seek out, and I like gratitude as a way towards happiness. In other words, happiness is that unspoken aim, or like when you go to see a movie and you suspend disbelief. Happiness will follow if you make gratitude your aim. And for me, that's more than just a bumper sticker. That literally is a way. That is a practice. That is something I remind myself of. And why I'm sharing it here with you is that if I seek out gratitude, if you seek out gratitude, even amidst a terrible personal battle, you will find happiness in that moment, in that situation. And if you don't believe me, read Man's Search for Meaning, the unthinkable practice of living with gratitude in a concentration camp. Viktor Frankl writes about it poignantly, and it's incredibly sad and uplifting at the same time. But if he can do it, what's my excuse? If in the midst of living in that horror, he can force himself into a state of gratitude, into a state of peace of mind, then what's our excuse? We really can't make one.
And again, I'm coming back to the practical application of this, and so let's say that somebody's listening right now, Chris, and they've got some kind of, I don't know, crisis going on in their lives, or they just came out of the election and they're mad as hell and they're not going to take it anymore, kind of thing. What would your recommendation be? To take that hour in the morning to start off with that? I mean, give me again some practical application. You're very much high in the high mind here thing. Give me something practical that those of us that aren't to the Chris Story level of positivity yet can put into practice.
Practical application of gratitude, aiming ultimately towards this unspoken amount of happiness that we're going to achieve. I would say it could be as simple as journaling. Not everybody likes to write, not everybody likes to journal, but at the same time, there is, as you and I've talked about many times, there is a physical manifestation of writing. There's something that happens in that process that affects you neurologically and physiologically, such that you can't help but get some honey on you when you reach into the jar, even if you're handing it to somebody else. So if your goal is to help your family and or yourself, or help yourself and ergo help your family, because when you're better, it's like putting your oxygen mask on the plane, then you can help other people. If that is your aim and you're a little lost in the moment and you think that this is a fruitless conversation, and can we just get back to instituting what we're going to call the Michael Dukes income tax, which forever will be known as the Dukes tax, then I would say maybe take a minute, journal. It doesn't have to be an hour. You could take 10 minutes, take 5 minutes. If you don't have a couple of minutes for yourself to acknowledge what you're grateful for, even if the people you wanted to be elected didn't get, or you're most upset at the low voter turnout, or you can't believe people could be suckered in Pennsylvania into voting for Fetterman, and that's just bothering you, even all the way up in North Pole, Alaska, I would say stop for a minute. And what are you grateful for? I am so grateful for the Constitution of the United States of America and a more perfect union. It ain't done yet. We're not done yet. I am grateful, and this is something that I literally put myself through this morning. I am grateful that our best days are ahead of us in America. I truly believe that, and sometimes I have to make that a mantra, because it's sometimes I lose sight of that. But when I really stop and I journal and I put thoughts to pen and paper, that's one of the things that bubbles to the top in one of my gratitude practices is I am so grateful that the best days of America are ahead of us, not behind us, ahead of us.
Mm. Okay, well, some practical advice from Chris Story. Now we're coming to the we're in November. This is everybody's doing the NaNoWriMo and all that stuff, but you've been writing this whole time, and so give us an update on your books before we let you go here.
Well, thank you, Michael. I'm pretty excited. I thank you for doing that because I just completed my manuscript for my second Jacob Mann novel. This one it's called The Watchman, and I just am getting ready to hand it off to the editor. I just finished it over the weekend, and pretty excited about it. It's one of those things that I think it's good, but it's taken me a number of months to write it, and I'm thinking, I don't know. You get nervous. It's a little bit like taking your puppy out into the public for the first time. Is it going to wet itself? Is it going to make dookie right there in the middle of the trail, or is it going to be well behaved? We don't know yet, but I'm pretty excited. And I can't wait. Mostly, I can't wait to hand it off to you because my brother's my biggest critic in the world, always has been. That's what older brothers are for.
Right.
And he listened to The Making of Man. He didn't read it. He listened to it. And you told him that story. You narrated it, and he said that was great. And I said, "Thank you so much." And he goes, "I mean, Michael's narration really made that story." I said, "Well, thanks a lot. Thanks a lot. I don't care. I'll take it.
I'll take it. I'll take any positive."
But I'm excited, so I'm gonna. Yeah, I hope to have it in your hands even before the paperback is out. I want to get your voice on it.
Well, we'll be looking forward to that for sure. Chris Story, ilovehomeralaska.com. He's got a multitude of books, The Backyard Millionaire and Born to Live and The Making of Man and all these other kind of stuff, both fiction and nonfiction, self-help and more. You can catch him every Tuesday and Thursday on the stations down in the peninsula of Capan. And it's I look forward to hearing more from you. Thank you for coming in, my friend, and sharing with us and giving us a little bit of attitude of gratitude and a way to work on our own happiness and practicing happiness every day. I appreciate that.
My pleasure, Michael. Thanks for being here. Thanks for having me.
Well, we appreciate you coming on board. Folks, we are out of time for this segment. We got more coming up. The Michael Duke Show continues. One final segment dead ahead. Your home for common sense, liberty-based, free thinking radio.
If you missed the show, you can listen to it on your time with Dukes on Demand. Oh, and it's free. Like America used to be. Streaming live every weekday morning on Facebook Live and MichaelDukesShow.com.
Okay, we're in the break here, and Chris Story is still with us. Everything, I appreciate it, my friend. That was some good stuff. I'm always looking for the practical applications because you're always up in the rural area. Those of us who are not so
the clouds.
Those of us who are not so
clouds.
cerebral are like, okay, great, break it down for us morons down here on the street. How do we make that work on a daily basis? But
I appreciate the poking and the questions because it does really come down to easy to say, how do you put it into practice?
Exactly.
And there's nothing worse than some sort of an affirmation that you're like, okay, well now what? What do we do with that? It's a little bit like looking at the results of a recipe and go, yeah, but how do I make that cake?
Right. Well, it's always it's always these great ideas, right, that you hear in these books and everything. And like you said, these affirmations or these little trite phrases, and everything. But you're like, okay, great. Now talk to me like I'm a 5-year-old and tell me how to put it into practice. That's what people are always looking back, right? I mean, tell me how to put this into practice because that's what I really need. And
well, I think that word, if we just accept that word, I mean, why do we allow doctors to continue to practice 30, 40 years and they're still practicing? They don't have it right yet because it's constant evolving, constantly increasing knowledge base and expanding our understanding of ourselves, which can sound super narcissistic and egotistic and everything else. But at the same time, truly, if you don't know who you are, where you're going, we don't know what you're going to end up being like or where you'll end up in life. So might as well take a minute and reflect on who you are and more importantly, who do you want to be? How do you want to show up? Who do you want to become? Well, and to me, that is a practice. It's ongoing.
And one of the things that I think happens to us is that we just kind of we let life happen, right?
Yeah.
We don't take the proactive step like you do, like you were just talking about, of, waking up in the morning and being proactive in, maybe doing some exercises or some journaling or something. Instead of being proactive, we roll out of bed and we're like, oh, the day is about to wash over us, and we're just going to stand there and take it in the surf instead of being ready and preparing ourselves, and preparing our, girding our mental loins, so to speak, against the day and doing stuff like that. And let's face it, it's not always easy to develop those habits. It takes some time and it takes some effort. And most people are just like, I just want to get through another day.
I surround myself too, and what I didn't even mention this, I didn't think about it, but yeah, so I go through that gratitude practice, but then I surround myself with books, and I got I counted 15 books are out and around me. I'm in my library, and sitting beside me on a coffee table on one side are about a dozen books, and then 2 more books on my right, and those are all books I just kind of actively reading and constantly going through and rereading. Like one little book, it's called Pelmanism. I don't know if you've ever heard of it. It came in about 1905, and it was an English based thought philosophy or science of thought on success and creating a better life for yourself. And this little tiny book I picked up for $2 in a antique store in Seattle about 14 years ago. They were just selling it because it looked cool. It's like an old book, and it was just for decor. And I picked this up and I leaf through it maybe once a month and just kind of get an idea on little practical applications. It's really an interesting little philosophy. But that's sitting right beside a book just came out on Rush Limbaugh, the greatest of all time, and next to that is Think and Grow Rich, and then one about the Immigrant Edge, book called by Brian Buffini, talks about why immigrants do so well in America. Anyway, just constantly surrounding myself with that kind of stuff. It is a practice. Reading is a practice.
Sure. Well, and the positive. Remember, it's the old adage of you are for the difference between who you are today and who you are in 5 years is the people that you surround yourself with and the books that you read. Right.
Yeah.
I mean, that's because each one of those books is a new idea, even if it's an old idea repackaged or repurposed in a new wrapper, it's still a new way to spend. You're right. That's something that I think we should all be. I mean, something that I know that I need to work on a little bit more is to take that time to have that quiet. What do they call it? You call it the power hour, the miracle moment, whatever it is, of peace and quiet ahead of time. I think that's good stuff. We really need to pay attention to that. So.
You sound 100%. You back 100%. It sounds like.
Well, almost. I can't taste or smell anything, which really makes eating fun. But oh man, it all tastes. It's weird. I mean, I'm eating this, and I'm like, all I can do is taste the texture. That's weird. I mean, it's just when you can't taste the coffee or smell the coffee, that's just not. That's not fun. So.
Especially when you still crave it.
I know. I want a nice, good, rich cup of coffee, and all it tastes like is hot water. So I don't know what to do at that point. Hopefully it comes back. I guess most people say it comes back in a couple of weeks. We'll see what happens.
The higher doses of zinc you take in the meantime will help that. My experience.
All right.
Hey, take it easy.
Appreciate it, my friend. Thanks for calling in, Chris Story, the man from Homer. Appreciate you coming on board. All right, folks, we are coming up onto it. Don't know what I'm going to say. I'm going to say something. I'll talk about something. Coming up tomorrow on the program, I don't know who we're going to have, but we're going to have somebody. We'll talk about it here. Here we go. All right, come out from your corners. I want a clean fight. No grabbing, no biting, no scratching. Hello and good morning. Welcome back to the program, The Michael Duke Show, Tuesday edition. We just finished up with Chris Story, the man from Homer. I always feel better when I'm done with Chris, just because he's gone. I always feel better when he's gone. No, just kidding. Chris is always he's always a barrel of laughs and always gives us something good to think about. I did love the whole idea of the Michael Dukes, the income tax. Oh God, that's all. That's all we need. That's all. I'm just throwing some ideas out there. I don't know. I mean, I wish I had. I wish I knew what the secret trigger would be to get people involved and to be thinking about things in the same way that we've been thinking about them and talking about them for years. You know, about the overall costs of government, of what it takes and what does it, that there's opportunity costs that are lost by taking money out of the private sector and putting it into the public sector and taking that money from Alaskans. And what does that, what does that look like and what does that mean? Kevin, I think, also has a good example here. He says, a government that robs Peter to pay Paul will always have the support of Paul. So said George Bernard Shaw. But Paul is currently getting public funding for his programs, or so he is told, from his dividend, right? That's the argument. Well, we're taking your dividend to give you better public services. But Kevin says the answer is to find a way to convince Paul that he could have both more limited government services and his dividend. I like that idea. So how do we do it? That's what I'm asking. How do we move the needle on that? Because currently what we've been doing is obviously not working. It's obviously not getting the people's attention. They're not seeing the argument. We've been making the argument. Brad's been on this program for the last 5 years talking about the impact of the PFD and especially on lower and middle income families. But it's not moving the needle enough. And it's not even in the general public discourse, right? It's not even out there. That's why I was just throwing ideas at the wall in the previous segment earlier this hour. And I was just saying, well, maybe we just start advocating for an income tax. I mean, that would shock a lot of people, right? Maybe that's what you need, the shock value. Maybe we go back to the Hammond argument, the Hammond ideal of, hey, just put the income tax on the books and it will just hang there. And the next time they run out of money, you say, well, don't take the PFD, go ahead and turn up the income tax. That way it's an equitable distribution across the entire spectrum, not just lower and middle income Alaskans. Maybe it's that shock value. I don't know. I mean, I really don't. I'm looking at all these things and trying to figure, how do we get people's attention? Now, granted, I will tell you right now that, again, the risk aversion that we are facing in this state has brought us to where we are today. The risk aversion to being so against having to pay any kind of taxes that we're willing to give the government and the legislature anything that they want as long as they don't tax us. Meanwhile, we allow them to tax us through the taking of the PFD. And of course, they get the stealth tax of all the money flowing straight into the state treasury versus going through our hands to begin with. And so what is it actually costing us? What is it actually costing us? It's an interesting, it's a conundrum. It's a conundrum. It is an interesting thought experiment. I don't know what it's going to take to, make those things work. Now, Christine says equitable distribution among the 50% that pay any taxes. That's the other part of the problem, right? I mean, right now, the pendulum is swung the other way. We're disproportionately affecting the lowest 80% income earners in the state. But at the same time, if we create some kind of progressive income tax that only affects the high rollers and the top 20 percentile, that also doesn't work. So I just don't know. I just don't know. what it's going to take to get people to think about this in terms of the, the equitability of who pays and the effect on the economy overall. I just don't have an answer on that. Shocking, I know. Shocking that I don't have an answer. But I'm just trying to think of something to get people's attention, because obviously what we've been doing is just not enough. They still have the lever to confiscate the PFD when the Michael Dukes tax is not enough. Government begets government. Yes, I would agree. They do have the lever to confiscate the PFD. But at that point, if they did have, if some kind of broad-based tax was not enough, then they'd have to come back and they would have to make that argument to the people. That would be an interesting discussion. Alaska is already the heaviest taxed people on the planet. The people's resources go directly to the government. Harold, Harold, I agree. That's the thing. We are already the heavy. We are so tax adverse in every discussion. Oh, we can't do that. No taxes, no matter what it is. But you're already being taxed. That's the irony of the whole situation. You're already being taxed. Yeah. It's interesting. I don't have an answer. I don't have a solution to this. But I think it's time we started having these conversations. I think maybe we have some radical conversations. Maybe we throw some stuff out there that is completely opposite of what we would normally go for, just to see. Let's make the argument. Let's debate it. Let's debate the pros and cons of it. I think now is the time, because obviously what we're doing is not working. That's the bottom line. What we're doing is not working. Tyler says, I admit I used to be an absolutely no new taxes person, but Brad is right. They're already taxing us. What irks me most about thinking the instituting a new tax is the state shows zero interest in reducing its size and scope. I'm with you. I am 100% with you on that. Well, I guess tomorrow's another day. We got Elijah Verhagen coming up on Thursday. Tomorrow, I don't know who we're going to have on. We'll have somebody on. Maybe we'll talk more about this. The newly christened Michael Dukes income tax. Oh, man. All right, my friends. Thanks for coming in and joining us. The Michael Dukes Show. Common sense, liberty-based, free-thinking radio. We will see you tomorrow. Be kind. Love one another. Live well. All right, my friends, do me one favor before you leave. Please share this video. That's all I'm asking. Just share it. Share the video today, wherever you're watching. Share it, love it, leave it. We got to go. We will see you tomorrow. Have a great day.
We've shed our terrestrial radio skin, and now we are slimy lizard internet people. It's the Michael Dukes Show.